Video is for educational and informational purposes only. It does not condone the second word of the subject name. It is for educational and informational purposes only. It covers history, philosophy, and sociology to some degrees. And the topic is social murder. And yes, this is a Wikipedia page. However, there are lots of sources cited at the bottom of the page, and the information seems pretty legitimate at this point. But we can always dive deeper if you'd wish. Just let me know. But anyways, social murder is a concept used to describe an unnatural death that is believed to occur due to social, political, or economic oppression instead of direct violence. Originally coined in 1845 by German philosopher Friedrich Engels, it has been used by left-wing politicians, journalists, and activists to describe deaths they attribute to larger social forces. The history of it. The term social murder was first introduced by Friedrich Engels in his 1845 work, The Condition of the Working Class in England, with regard to the English city of Manchester in the Victorian era. Engels used the term after describing how societal conditions such as poverty, poor housing, and dangerous working conditions have resulted in avoidable excess mortality among the working class. He also argued those conditions were the results of inherent exploitation and pursuit of profit under the capitalist system. In his opinion, at fault was the class which at present holds social and political control, for example, the bourgeoisie, who placed hundreds of proletarians, the working class, in a position where they inevitably met an early and unnatural death. According to Engels, this type of death was in a different category to murder and manslaughter committed by individuals against one another, such as social murder explicitly was committed by political and social elite against the poorest in society. He said, when one individual inflicts bodily injury upon another such that death results, we call the deed manslaughter. When the assailant knew in advance that the injury would be fatal, we call his deed murder. But when society places hundreds of proletarians, remember that's the working class, in such a position that inevitably meet a too early and unnatural death, one which is quite as much by a death by violence as that by the sword or bullet, when it deprives thousands of necessaries of life, places them under conditions in which they cannot live, forces them through the strong arm of the law to remain in such conditions until that death ensues, which is inevitable consequence, knows that these thousands of victims must perish and yet permits these conditions to remain. Its deed is murder just as surely as the deed of the single individual disguised as malicious murder against which none can defend himself, which does not seem what it is, because no man sees the murderer, because the death of the victim seems a natural one, since the offense is more of an omission than commission, but murder it remains. In the 21st century, the term social murder reemerged in response to growing social and health inequalities seen around the world. For example, British politician John Macdonald used the term to describe conservative economic policy as well as the events such as the 2017 Grenfell Tower fire. York University professor Dennis Raphael used it to describe conservative public policy in Ontario, Canada. Canadian economists Robert Sharomas and Ian Hudson of the University of Manitoba used the term to describe conservative economics in their book Social Murder and Other Shortcomings of Conservative Economics, released in 2007. An article published in the Critical Social Policy in 2018, sociologist Chris Grover of Lancaster University writes that social security austerity in Great Britain, which imposes hardships on the mental and physical well-being of working-class people, has resulted in social murder, with increases in suicides, deaths from malnutrition, and people dying on the streets. In 2021, the BMJ executive editor, Cameron Abbasi, used the term to describe governmental policy which he proposed had failed to control the COVID-19 pandemic. Author and journalist Chris Hedges claims ruling elites are the architects of social murder by accelerating ecological collapse and climate change. Chris Hedges said, "What is taking place is not neglect. It is not ineptitude. It is not policy failure. It is murder. It is murder because it was premeditated. It is murder because a conscious choice was made by the global ruling classes to extinguish life rather than to protect it. It is murder because profit, despite the hard statistics, the growing climate disruptions, and the scientific modeling, is deemed more important than human life and human survival. In the United Kingdom, consistent cuts of healthcare and public services spending, together with a push towards privatized jobs with poor conditions, are argued to be the same kind of consequences that Engels saw in the 1840s. During the 2024 Spanish floods, the World Socialist website criticized the Spanish government's actions, describing them as social murder. After the December 2024 killing of United Healthcare Group CEO Brian Thompson, an opinion piece by New York Intelligencer argued that the company's policies and practices related to denying coverage for essential medical treatments fall under the concept of social murder, also noting that it could have potentially contributed as a motive for the attack. As they put it in their piece, United Healthcare does not pull a trigger and shoot its victims in the street. Instead, they suffer and may die of cancer or heart disease or some other treatable condition. And as I said, there are lots of other sources that are cited at the bottom of the Wikipedia page on social murder. There's also diseases of despair and shit life syndrome, which we can go over next time. Until then, goodbye.